For owner, convertible contracts provide them with cost and schedule certainty. For contractors, it provides them the ability to make more money than a cost reimbursable by going into a lump sum environment at the right time.
Welcome to $1 Billion Projects, the only podcast sharing lessons from thought leaders who work in mining, oil and gas, and all other industrial verticals, where the projects have budgets in the millions and sometimes billions of dollars. I'm Wes Eddessa, founder and CEO of Patient, and I'll be your host as we explore insights and challenges from the projects that we consider to be the backbone of our economy. Now let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the $1 Billion Projects podcast. My name is Wes Eddessa. I'm really happy to have Wissam join us today. Wissam, why don't you go ahead and give a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure, Wes. Thanks very much for the opportunity. I started my career as a civil engineer, worked a little bit in the Gulf in Saudi Arabia and around. And then I moved to Canada in 1999. Joined Xenon Environmental as a project manager. 9 months later, I was promoted to senior project manager. And that's because they kind of realized that I take a project. I sold margins 20%. My fellows deliver it at 10, 15 at the end. And mine goes to 40% and 35 and 45 and sometimes 60% more profit. So they said, why don't you just do more of that? I was given the largest ultrafiltration plant in the world to execute for Samsung in Korea. And that was, led me to travel to Asia quite a bit, 16 times to get this asset built. And then they asked me to become the procurement manager for Canada. Then they asked me to assist MENA, Middle East and North Africa. And then they promoted me to contracts and contracts manager for North America. And that's when I started to deal a little bit with Alberta, learn a little bit about, the skilled labor shortage and the booming economy, and the oil was on the rise. And I moved to Alberta in 2007. I joined Suncor as a senior contract administrator. Then again, similar, pattern. A year I was contracts lead and then contracts manager, senior contracts manager. I was given the utilities area, which is about $3.2 billion spend on the Voyager Upgrader. And then the cokers, which is another $3 billion. And then when Voyager unfortunately was shelved after negotiating all these contracts with the contract and the deep dive initiative that Rick George initiated, didn't get him the pricing and that he needed to proceed with the project. I was requested to lead the merger with Petro-Canada to negotiate all these contracts shut down or safe mode. And then I was requested to also, at the same time, lead the category management section. They called it category analysis for complex services. So that included operation, maintenance, construction, drilling and completion, and those kind of things. And then when there was a need to serve some time on the contractor side, because owner side is a domain on its own, but I also wanted to do some work on the contractor side. So that's when I joined Worley Parsons, engineering, procurement, construction giant, 40,000 personnel, 140 offices in 40 countries. And I was requested to lead the Husky Sunrise prime contract. It was the largest Worley Corps has ever signed, and it was a convertible contract. And it was successfully converted, and they liked what they saw and the potential. I got 30% raise. So I was very happy with that. That's when I got my Mercedes. And then I was requested at the same time, towards the tail end of that project, to lead the conversion as well and become the business manager for the Aurora Tailings Management. That's a $650 million project with Imperial Oil. Towards the tail end of that, I was requested to lead the Prime Energy Mackay River commercial facilities. That's a $450 million contract. And so total was about $1.5 billion with Worley. And when things slowed down a little bit with the economic downturn, a friend of mine asked me to join the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain expansion project. And in Trans Mountain, I've done everything, right? I started as facilities supply chain manager, so about $1 billion kind of scope. And then they added the power and telecommunications. And then I was requested by the senior vice president, supply chain and integration, to take on the pipeline as well. And at that point, I had, a mandate to mobilize contractors to 4 spreads as the construction was sitting at 0. It was, a very challenging situation, but, we quickly, within 6 to 8 weeks, signed 4 new general construction contracts with the contractors for spread 4B. That was Bannister, and spread 6 and 7A, that was with Michaels, and obviously the most challenging of those was 5B with Cute Bonatti on the most technically challenging area of Trans Mountain. Did a bunch of contracts of all sorts of things: design, build, own, operate, and transfer in 20 years, fixed fee, lump sum, guaranteed maximum price, cost reimbursable, time, material, unit rate, you name it. So I guess I consider it to be the highlight of my career, to be responsible for $17.5 billion with a B of contracts. You get what I mean? Like, it needs a lot of grit and gravitas, and in tandem, I'm always studying. I'm a graduate of Harvard contract law and leadership programs. I took construction law with York University. I took advanced contract management with Villanova University. I invested heavily in learning about artificial intelligence. I authored the only book on convertible contracts in the market, and I'm standing up the smart contracting community to bring together like-minded individuals to learn about convertible contracts. And because I have a passion for them, I love them. I think they're the best right now for Alberta, for Canada, and for the oil and gas industry, and the EPC industry as well. So I'll shut up now, because you asked me who I am, and I just went into it. So sorry if I was verbose a little bit.
No, all good. It's something there's a lot to be proud of in that story, and then definitely the tail end of it, 17 billion in capital spend in such a high profile, complex project is something to be proud of. So
Absolutely.
I'm interested, if you rewind right to the beginning of the story, what was the path for you that landed you in heavy industry, in like project execution? Of all the things that young Wissam could have chosen to do, how did you find your way into the industry?
Actually, I started, as I said, operation and tendering specialist on a Saudi company owned by a very prominent prince. They had a lot of major projects of different kind of sectors. So they had city cleaning projects, and these are labor intensive, thousands of individuals, and they clean cities, right? So these are billion-dollar contracts for the city of Jeddah, Mecca, Medina, and Riyadh, which is the capital of Saudi. These were joint ventures with Browning Ferris and those kind of companies, as well as the Presidency of Civil Aviation. So this was a group of airports, operation and maintenance. So they had some small capital projects, but mainly O&M projects. And I was just part of the Directorate of Project Support Services. So that included tendering, contracting, and a few other ancillary departments that support that, estimating this and that. I was working closely with the deputy managing director, and he asked me to come in and said, Wissam, I have an opportunity. I'm just thinking that you're the right fit for it. I said, yeah. I said, what do you know about reverse osmosis? I said, I know a little bit in civil engineering, water treatment, and stuff like that. But he said, we have a fantastic company, and I want you to head the Eastern Province branch that deals with Aramco, the oil company. There's some good potential there. And I know that you understand the technology quick, and you're going to be able to support the factory expand their biological treatment systems, as well as expand the sales of membranes, film tech, DuPont, holofine fiber, as well as the chemicals and this and that. And I became the focal point of contact for Saudi Aramco, the giant oil company. And we signed a contract to execute the biological treatment system for the city of Ahsa in the Eastern Province. Then I decided, when I started to work on my MBA with Kennedy Western University at the time and so forth, I started to learn more about other avenues. And I got exposed to, some Canadian technologies like the xenon environmental ultrafiltration technology. And they were the leaders. They're still the leader today. And I decided to move to Canada and join one company. So everybody was saying, you need to apply to many companies and so forth. I applied only to one company and I got the job. And that was project manager in the industrial division. And I started building, systems for Owens Corning, Solutia, Baxter, a couple of projects in Mexico. And then I, based on the performance, I was approached to execute the largest contract that the company has ever signed. And that was to build the largest ultrafiltration plant for Samsung in Korea. And it was a crazy schedule. We had people coming in, senior vice presidents coming in from the US, Samsung VPs, to see the progress of the work. And once they saw our level 3 schedule and the fact that we hit every line item deadlines for the first 14, they stopped coming. There was liquidated damages, very crazy schedule. And afterwards, they start my fellow Xenon environmental folks started calling me with Samsung. That's how they changed my name, with Samsung. And as I said, started in the project management, did that for solid 5 years, and then moved to procurement and contract administration for another 3, where I negotiated large agreements, complex agreements to essentially get volume discounts once you hit certain targets. So this was meshing the demand pipeline with the supply side. And we did fantastic work together with the procurement team and so forth, and contract administration. And as I said, I always have this dual focus. To one of my success factors as a project manager was I fully understood the contract. I read every point in it. I memorized sections of it. I understand the risks and opportunities. I avail those and mitigate these risks. And when you control your costs and increase your revenue, you maximize your profit. And when you do that, you have the ability to do well for yourself and the company, and the whole cycle continues to propel in the right direction.
That's awesome.
And as I said, I got fascinated with big projects, and, moving to Alberta was just, testament to the vision I saw for myself executing these large projects. And, once you're talking, a few $100 million, you're into the billions. And soon after you're into the 10, my next gig is probably going to be a $50 billion project or a $100 billion project. I hope I'll the climate that we're living in is going to be conducive to those kind of large projects, although with the overruns that you've seen on mega projects and the schedule delays and all of that, there's apprehension on the owner side of things to proceed with those kind of projects. That's why I thought, convertible contracts is just the absolute solution, perfect solution to this kind of problem.
Okay, so you went to Suncor and you went to the Voyager project, and for everybody's benefit at a high level, what was that project supposed to be?
It's an upgrader, and it's actually the fact that when was the last time Alberta has an upgrader built? When will Alberta will have another upgrader built? It's sad that our bitumen is shipped down south for the refineries in the US to upgrade the product and sell it back to us, and we sell at differential, right? 16, 18, 20, 22%, sometimes 50% in certain circumstances.
Mhm.
So it's sad that the biggest upgrader, the Voyager upgrader, was shut down at the end. It felt horrible, and I had to negotiate the shutdown of all these fabulous contracts, some of which were commitment, like one with EPCOR to build, a wastewater treatment system. And it was a 20-year contract, and they spend money, and there were commitments and stuff like that. There was, nitrogen supply with Air Liquide that was also another 20-year. And, the same kind of feeling happened in Fort Hills, where we had to shut down numerous contracts as well. So, Alberta is landlocked, and it needs a lot of projects to transport these resources out to the international market at fair market value, to be sold at fair market value. It needs a lot of upgrading. We have 188 billion, well, 170 billion barrels as proven reserves that could last us for 188 years. And we're just producing 4.5 million barrels, per day, and we consume 2 point something. The net is 2 million, and most of that, 99% of that, goes to the US at a very, very cheap price. And it's just sad. And we import 890,000 barrels as well. You get what I mean? So
Mhm.
look at the net, it's even worse.
Okay, so at this point, you've got experience on the client side, and then you flip over to the contractor side, Husky Sunrise. How close were you to the construction team? What was your role there? And what was it like representing the contractor and interfacing with?
So Husky Sunrise was a SAGD facility, so steam assisted gravity drainage, which is the technology that's well known to produce results in oil sands, and just because of the nature of the resource. We had to work very, very closely during the conversion process with a multitude of disciplines. So, as part of the lump sum conversion, you stand up a team that is responsible for, estimating, for producing a baseline scope and a baseline schedule and a baseline cost estimate. And then when we hit the 60% engineering, we ran the process, and at 90% we submitted a lump sum proposal to Husky, which they had 30 days to approve, and it was 37 volume. That 37 volume was produced by the team. So we had to do, construction, constructability, and we had to do estimation of all the remaining engineering, all the procurement of the long lead item based on a buyout report for everything that needs to be bought until the end of the project, with some room for escalation, because you're taking a risk for the stuff that you haven't bought yet once you go into lump sum. And then the construction piece, there was a lot of risks that we had to account for. So we ran a Monte Carlo risk analysis with the risk folks, construction people in the room, engineering people in the room, procurement, quality, all the disciplines, and produce those tornado diagrams, and you identify the top risks, and you identify the contingency, and you build a lump sum contract, that a lump sum proposal that has to be internally approved by the executives and the board, because it's once you reach 100, a few $100 million, you need to get the board approval, and that's for all the EPC companies, not necessarily the one I was working for. And then start negotiating that with the client. And some contracts have lump sum conversion subject to dispute resolution. Some companies don't. So when there is no avenue to go to dispute resolution, any conflicts have to be resolved, and a contract has to be converted, and then you're into a lump sum contract. You need to work even closer with the construction and everybody else to make sure that you're doing things correctly the first time, so because rework is to your account, and you need to finish ahead of schedule, because that will maximize your profit and put you away from liquidated damages. And the lump sum environment forces contractors to be efficient and to essentially make sure that the turnover requirements are identified at the beginning of the work, understood by everyone, and that all the contractual obligations understood by the team and they've assigned, and everyone understand their role in executing the contract and meeting the deadlines, and making sure that at the end, when the final product is handed over to the client, that you're not staying further to work on punches and this and that. So minimal punching and finishing the work, and that's how you get out and you look for the next job.
Help me understand at what point. So it was time and material up until like what point was anybody in the field? That any work started on the site before? At what point did it flip from T&M
Excellent
to?
question. Excellent question. So there are early conversions where you start cost reimbursable, and then at 30%, for example, you start a conversion process, and then at 60, you convert to lump sum. And at 60% engineering, you would have bought some major equipment and some bulks and this and that, and some long lead items, but you wouldn't have completed your procurement, and most probably you wouldn't have started construction. Maybe some geotechnical work, some excavation, some early works that you can do, but minimal. But at late conversions, where you start at 60 and then you do 90, there were very, very late conversions where you start at 90% engineering, but I don't like those. 60 to 90, you would see some construction proceeding, and it would be on cost reimbursable basis, time, material, unit rates, that kind of thing. And then once you go into lump sum, once the lump sum conversion is approved and you're into a lump sum contract, then you're off to the races, because contractors wanna finish, get out of there, and the owner steps back and just process payments and do not interfere. That would be the very best.
Interesting. So at 90% of the design engineering done, what would you typically see overall percent complete in the field if you had to pick a number?
You would see something like 10, 15, 20%.
Got it.
Yeah.
On the contractor side now, let's say you have the benefit of seeing 10 to 15% of the field execution being done, and then the conversion happens to lump sum. What changes on site?
In a time material,
Just to be clear, I've seen a lot of the inverse where it started lump sum and then it converted to time and material. I can articulate some of the, what that looks like. So I'm wondering if it's the inverse.
Another great question. So I'll tell you, you could see the immediate change in behavior in that the EPC contractor usually has a very large engineering procurement team, right? Because they make money by mobilizing personnel and billing on a monthly basis. But once they go to lump sum, you'll see immediate departure of a large number of engineering folks, a large number of procurement. Unless they are really needed, they're no longer there. So you see immediate efficiency there, right? And then the construction side of things, when you're in a cost reimbursable scenario, out of fiduciary responsibility, out of being a good construction contractor, out of being good citizen, good corporate citizen, and so forth, you watch the spend as if it were your money, right? But most contractors realize that, hey, I don't need these many people. I don't need all this equipment. Yes, I mobilized all the equipment that I needed and some on a cost reimbursable because I'm being paid on, for limbs, right? For labor, material, and equipment on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. So the more equipment I have, the more money I make. But in a lump sum, only the equipment that's needed to do the work is going to be there. Anything that I don't need, I need to demobilize, right? Because I need to reduce my costs. I need to control the costs.
It'd be interesting to see an exodus of people from site today. That's any owner's dream, I would imagine. Right?
Yeah.
You own the lump sum contract at that point, and probably a large portion of the spend is subbed out. How successful are you with your subs at converting their T&M into fixed price? And as you go down the chain, at some point, my assumption would be that you might accept some risk if you force someone into a fixed price contract. So how do you manage that?
You're always, as a general contractor, you're going to have more risk than you're able to pass on down or cascade down to your subs. And the reason I'm saying that is, your limitation of liability is 20% of contract value. On $1 billion, that's 200 million. You can't pass down the liability to all your subs. Some of them may not accept 20%. Some of them may not accept to convert to a lump sum scenario. And you take that risk on those kind of incongruent, non-congruent subcontracts, and you monitor them, and now you're into micromanaging things to make sure that your costs are under control.
Follow up there. When you're you're as the GC or EPC are in a T&M contract before it converts, what is the level of effort you're applying to reviewing the cost of your subs before it flows through to the client versus after?
Obviously, you also see change in behavior there, right? Because you're not assuming much risk when your sub goes a little bit over budget or stays longer and so forth. It's cost reimbursable. You're getting paid for the cost that you incur by the sub. Sometimes some contracts are not that conducive to cost mitigation as well, because they apply a factor on the sub. So there's a markup of, say, 5% on subs or 10% on subs. So the more the sub spends, the more I make as a general contractor or as an EPC contractor, right? And therefore, I'm not going to mind that, right? As a good contractor, I should be watching the costs, et cetera, et cetera. But if things happen, and things happen, delays in permits by the client, delay in land, coordination issues with their sub, or delay in free issue material from the owner to us, you're incurring costs. You're gonna find yourself behaving differently if you are in a lump sum environment, because anything that encroaches on your profit projection is going to be something that you need to control. As a contractor, for sustainability, you need to maximize your profit. And therefore, if you if you don't control your costs in a lump sum environment, you could go into a negative scenario, because if the client doesn't change the scope, your price is fixed.
Mhm.
So if my price is 100 million and my projected costs are, including indirects and what have you, is 80 million, and I'm going to make 20 million, if I don't control that 80 million, I could be incurring 120 million and lose 20 million, because the client is going to give me 100 million if they don't change anything. Now, change management changes things a little bit. You could increase your scope, or you could, find yourself in a, client asking you to accelerate or decelerate, or, there's a lot of things that in the change management domain that could improve your profitability even in a lump sum environment.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I want to jump into, how I heard you describe Kinder Morgan and then Trans Mountain and their main pipeline project, as what, would you describe it as the cornerstone of your career to date?
To a lot of people, this would be the largest contract that they've ever worked on. The largest project. There's how many people in Canada have negotiated and managed $17.5 billion in contracts? Not many, right? And so everyone on my team that worked on $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion sub project, spread or lower mainland or facilities or this and that. These are large contracts, complex, high risk, high intensity. And if you're negotiating a $10 million profit increase or decrease with a contractor, you get their executives. Imagine that you're talking about, liquidated damages in the $100 million range, or you're talking about a scope entitlement issue for 50 million, or, these are high stakes contracts. They're complex. They're life changing for some of the contractors, especially First Nations, for example, or that are doing this for the first time, or that are not that the partners are not that sophisticated to meet world class owner requirements as far as environment, safety, this and that.
Give me a snippet of what the project was. What are those kind of stats that would be high level for non-technical folks to understand?
So Trans Mountain is just the twinning of the existing line that was built in 1953. So it's at 1,150 kilometers. Includes a reactivation piece that was built before and needed some work. It included expansion of the Edmonton terminal, adding three tanks that are 500,000 barrels each, and expansion of the Burnaby terminal by adding 64 tanks. The facilities included building 12 new pump stations. And then in Lower Mainland, there was also expansion of the Westridge Marine Terminal, adding 3 berths there, as well as a control system. The major equipment included the Sulzer pumps, similar to the Sulzer pumps that were built in 1953, still operating till today. And I had the pleasure to be the only one in supply chain at the time for facilities. So I did the tendering and I did the award, and we did the kickoff meeting and went to the Sulzer facilities there to see these huge pumps. And there was power pole relocation. So anything that to clear the pathway for the pipeline, anything that is within say 18 meters from the pipeline needed to be relocated outside that range to provide for a clear right of way. So I managed that scope. There was no one at the time as well. There was a couple of transmission lines, the Kingsvale transmission line to connect BC Hydro Grid to the Kingsvale pump station. And that was done on a, initially we contemplated doing this on a design, build, own, operate, and transfer in 20 years. But based on our commitment to the nations there, in particular lower Nicola Indian Band, but then some of the conditions of Trans Mountain on the BC side, so the BC Environmental Assessment Office, said you can't do that. You have to build it, and once it's built, then you can transfer ownership. And so we had to do that on an EPC basis with Valor at the time. So they built the line, the transmission line, and then I'm hearing that by the end of this month, that the ownership is going to transfer to a joint venture between Lower Nicola Indian Band and EPCOR, so that the First Nation will own the line in perpetuity, and that's a great thing. At the beginning of the job, I saw this project when it was on paper, right? And we received the funding investment decision, and then Kinder Morgan decided to pull out, and then the government decided to step in because of the importance of Trans Mountain to Canada and the energy resources in Canada. And one of the biggest risks that the contractors faced on Trans Mountain was dealing with the First Nations. So they didn't know what's in the mutual benefit agreements we signed with. At the time when we started, it was 40 something. At the end, it was 64 First Nations that had mutual benefit agreements. And, we had to do a roadshow where we took the EPC and the general construction contractors and introduced them to the First Nations so that they can understand their capabilities and willingness and issues and challenges. And
What was that like?
how was it?
Yeah, what was that like for you?
It was fantastic. It got me to appreciate the rich history that Canada has. I got to see, Simc, where 1/3 of the line passes through their traditional territory, and I got to meet Peters and Alexander and Ashcroft and Whispering Pines and Tecumloops and all these great nations. And I have full respect to these nations, especially that it's not easy to hear a lot about pipeline issues and then allow them to pass through your territories, fearing leaks and environmental impact on very sensitive ecological areas. And you've seen the opposition that this project has faced at the beginning, especially in BC. What led Kinder Morgan to say, I'm out, is that they couldn't see through construction in BC. It was, environmental groups, phony environmental groups. Some of them were phony because, the US doesn't like to see that our resources are being exported outside of Canada to be sold at fair market value, as well as there's competition from rail, right? I think it's a fantastic project. The total spend with First Nations is almost $7 billion.
Yeah, that's impressive.
That's huge, right? And where did you see that anywhere? Where do you see partnerships with First Nations like we had in Trans Mountain? We had a fantastic team that did everything they can and beyond to provide economic opportunities and employment opportunities and training. And we had to, some of the nations had to get some capacity funding in order to negotiate contracts with us and so forth. And it was wonderful to see First Nations prosper, and you could see it every time you visit. There's something new, and there's opportunity, and there's prosperity. it went a long way in the path of reconciliation, is my opinion, right? And the fact that there is a potential that First Nations could be partners in the ownership of Trans Mountain, because eventually the government doesn't want to stay in ownership. And they said at some point, they said we're no longer going to be funding Trans Mountain from taxpayers' money, and that's why there's a significant chunk, a few $1 billion worth of UDC, like the interest during construction, for simplicity, and it added to why the price tag at the end of the project was that high. But it's a world class asset, fantastic in terms of safety, reliability, ESG. The brand is very, very strong, and these pipelines last a very long time. The financials, the underpinning financials, is about 30 years, but we have 1953 lines still operating.
Take me to like halfway through the project. You're responsible for a tremendous amount of spend. You're in the throes of construction. Maybe the start of the pandemic. What kept you responsible for the contracts? What kept you up at night?
Well, different things at various stages. So what kept me awake at night on the facility side was that we were shut down. The CPCN, the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, was pulled because the Federal Court of Appeal, felt that the government didn't do a good job in conducting meaningful consultation. And so you had to shut down, but we had special projects going on. We had engineering continue, because that's on the critical path. It's low spend, but high impact on the project, right? And I was disappointed sometimes when the leadership at Kinder Morgan said, we're not spending any money. And I said, it's just, we're risking 10,000. And they said, not $1. So at some point, these things kept me awake at night. And then when we received the, hey, go, it was, okay, let's go. And, supporting the project over 7.5 years took a toll on my health. And at the end, so at some point I told you that I was requested to take on the pipeline itself, and I didn't ask for it. I don't know why they did it. Maybe the passion, maybe the fact that I understand. I'm an engineer. I understand where engineering is coming from. I worked in close with the executives. I know what executives want, and usually it's a lot, and sometimes it's not super clear. It's your job to understand what they want and provide it to them. And even I always say my 2 cents, and then when the decision is made, I go with the flow and support it as if it were my decision. That's my MO. At some point when we had zero construction and 4 spreads, and then I was given that responsibility to get constructor out, mobilized, and so forth, and you see the amount of work that's needed. So I did it was a fast track negotiation on the facilities side, and we signed what some of the legal counsels coined as the foster child of contracts on the facilities side. On the pipeline side, we had these long owner requirements workshops where all the discipline leads from Trans Mountain would present to their counterparts on the contractor side, and then there would be an RFI process back and forth until everybody's clear, and that joint sign off on a scope of work document or an exhibit or an owner requirements. We had I led, working with obviously discipline leads and so forth, owner requirements exercise that lasted several months to write the owner requirement. We didn't have them, and when we rolled them out, it was fantastic because the light bulbs went on for a lot of contractors. That was a very busy period. The 4 contracts was a very condensed, and I worked day and night. We slept a few hours every day to make sure that the contracts are executed correctly, they're done, the due diligence is not impacted, and all the things that go along when you're negotiating. You're looking at benchmark. Are the unit rates consistent with what we have in other spreads? And if you have higher ones, you need to negotiate those. That adds time, but it's time well spent. And in one contract, we lowered the pricing for those high unit rates by tens of millions of dollars. When you have a signing ceremony pre-COVID, we used to print all these contracts, and we had to print 2 copies, and that printing time actually needed to be included in the formation timeline, so that people understand that for 2.5, 3 days you're printing all these contracts. Luckily now with DocuSign and all the post-COVID stuff, this is done digitally, and with the advent with artificial intelligence now, everything is super fast. But that kept me awake at night. When we had a major dispute on with a contractor and so forth, it kept me awake at night. I needed to be 100% sure that the entitlement piece was 100% clear, and that when we say you're not entitled, or this is, you ought to have known about this, or the contract is very clear about your remedies and your liabilities and indemnities and this and that, it is in fact that. And luckily, there were third parties that came in, and look, this project was, I haven't seen anything like it in terms of the bodies that provided oversight, whether it's Canada Energy Regulator, whether it's KPMG and McKinsey, and auditors, internal, external, this and that, and reporting to Ministry of Finance, the reporting on indigenous spend, satisfying all these 137 conditions that were mandated on the project to meet in order for the project to get sanctioned, and following through on it and so forth. It is a lot of work. At 80% construction, I was requested to lead major projects, change management, claims, and closeout, including Lower Mainland, which was not in my scope before. And that in itself is an additional burden and additional, I travel all these sites, and you get to see people, understand things, and look at and read contracts. I did that ridiculous amount of reading in this 7.5 years. It's unbelievable. And then I found myself in my bedroom with paramedics telling me that my blood pressure is 170 170 over 117. And if you Google that, that's heart attack level, stroke level. You need to be in the ER. You shouldn't be doing this. And that's when I had the discussion with our folks at Trans Mountain, and I left as of April 1st this year. And now I got my health back, and it's all good, but and leaves memories. And I always have this great respect to the team and the people and the contractors and the First Nations and the subs and the trades and the people. Sadly, we lost Sammy Sahili, a supervisor at SA Energy, Somerville Econ Energy Group, and which shut down the project for 2.5 months, and it produced a world-class safety culture and systems, and you could always say this project, there was a lot of work that was done to up the game for safety, environment, all those things that we talked about. It's world class.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I have a couple questions left for you. One is, how important in your role was visiting site, taking the time to leave the comfort of, like, the downtown corporate environment and getting out to the site? How important was that for you, and how much impact was there for the project?
Luckily, the executives believe that the senior manager should reside in the office. Everybody else is at site. So, most of the team was at site. But on a monthly basis, so we would go for a week, 10 days to I visited all the sites repeatedly. So the 16 sites for the pump stations, visited them all. Sorry, I should say that just the 12 new pump stations. There was four big sites, or the pig is not actually a pig. It's pipeline inspection gauge. It's
Yeah.
the thing that they run to check the integrity of the pipe and other things. And I visited, Lower Mainland several times to meet the people, the team, understand. And that when I say the team, it's the engineering, the project controls, the construction guys at site, the superintendent, the project director, and it's every one of those people to understand all the elements of a claim, all the elements for change management, all the elements for the contract to conduct, compliance audits, or, to resolve conflict and issues and make sure. So keeping your head on the ball, which is supporting construction. So at 20% construction, when I took over the pipeline, to 80% is 60%. 60% over 60 weeks is 1% per week. So that means whatever on the contract side, supply chain side, that we could do to support that 1% execution is top priority. Anything else is, but visiting the site is, you can't be a successful contracts manager without frequent visit to the site, to see the team, to see the progress, to understand the analytics and the benchmarks and the scorecards and all of this, and see what's going well and what's not going well. How can you support?
And I'd be remiss not to ask. So, for audio only, and so we offer audio and video for the podcast, but over your left shoulder, there looks to be the cover of a book. You talked about how you've authored a book. Would love to get you to share a little bit about what that was like and what people could expect to read if they purchase the copy.
This is a book, and there is another one in the making on negotiations. But this book, the reason I wrote this book is I felt that there's a gap in the EPC industry, and there are no other resources like this. This is the only book on convertible contracts. That's why I wrote it. I felt that everybody should know about convertible contracts. They're beautiful. They're easy to understand. I simplified it in 5 steps. And, this is based on 35 years journey in project management. As I said, dual focus, project management and contract administration. And I made it very affordable. I make $5 per unit, so it's not going to sustain a living, but in my opinion, solves huge problems for owner. It provides them, convertible contracts provide them with cost and schedule certainty. For contractors, it provides them the ability to make more money than a cost reimbursable by going into a lump sum environment at the right time, after understanding the scope and the risks, and working with the owner on an open book or not basis to develop a lump sum contract whereby all the risks are laid out on the table and a good negotiation taking place between the parties to identify which party is the best to own the risk. So if a contractor says, I need $6 million to take on weather risk, and based on the parties working together, the owner thinks that maybe we should take on that risk. Then they negotiate that, and it's reflected in the agreement. So there's no conversion like the other. The conversion is just a dance between two partners, and everyone, is more comfortable that way or the other, and it reflects the collective wisdom of both parties agreeing to execute the work in a lump sum environment, whereby the contractor wouldn't take a risk until they're comfortable with it. But you set it up from the beginning like that, and it ends nicely as a lump sum contract. I was sitting with one of my clients and just the other day having lunch, having dinner, and he said, "Wissam, we know that you made a lot of money, but you give us the cost and schedule certainty, and I came in under budget. I didn't spend the management reserve that I had." Another executive that I met 2-3 weeks ago, and he's now in Poland for a 2-year assignment. He said, "Wissam, what you've done, we would have never been able to do it on our own." And I think he provided a testimony as well in the book, and he said, the level of sophistication and rigor and the risk mitigation, risk identification, mitigation, and risk elimination that we were able to do on this and deliver the project on a lump sum basis was just wonderful, right? And so I think it's the solution to our beautiful industry, whereby owners would proceed on a cost reimbursable basis, agree to convert in a certain uh, timeline and in accordance with the pre-agreed to parameters and conversion factors, and they run the process in accordance with the 5 steps, and voila, comes a reasonable lump sum contract for both parties to sign. That allows you to proceed.
Sounds super interesting. So, last question: what's the name of the book, and where can people find it?
Yeah, so the name of the book is Lump Sum Conversion for EPC Projects, the proven 5-step system for managing convertible contracts. And I can provide the link to where the book landing page is. It sells on Amazon as well, and it's available. It's going to be available in Kindle. It's going to be translated into 7 languages. We're working on that, as well as working with artificial intelligence to create training modules with a human in the loop. I'm reviewing those training modules myself, line by line, to make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't screw up anything. And then Smart Contracting Club is a channel I've created on YouTube to talk about this. So over the next 9 months, I have a social calendar that I'll speak to every element of the book, and there are 95 shorts. They're going to be on that channel. The book comes with 5 freebies. One is an exhibit on artificial intelligence and convertible contracts, an ebook on claims prevention, another on best practices and lessons learned in convertible contracts, and a link to a 45-minute free consultation with me where they read the book and they download the attachments and all the graphs and all the templates and so forth, including the negotiation templates that I kept refining over the years and so forth, and I can walk them through it and so forth, absolutely free, just helping the industry and young professionals. And one day, I hope that owners will realize the beauty of convertible contracts and use it. Contractors are going to be looking at this and say, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder why we haven't been doing it. This could have just made a lot of more money and became much more efficient. And you apply it in scale in Alberta, and Alberta would be a different place. Canada would be a different place.
Wissam, thank you very much for sharing, and thanks for joining us today. It was great to hear your story. It's super impressive, and thanks for sharing your perspective.
My absolute pleasure. And I want to interview you and put that interview on my community club, because Smart Contracting Club, because I think you have a fantastic offer, a fantastic product, and I'm going to be super excited if you accept the invitation to come, and I'll quiz you on your fantastic software and how you impose the compliance on the invoicing and payment and so forth, and it's just wonderful.
Thank you. I'll accept that offer for sure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Wissam.
Have a wonderful day.